Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Roundup. This is a pretty beefy one. Jason Schreier has ended his tenure at Kotaku. This year's Gamescom has been forced to go all digital down to lockdown, and a new article is suggesting a limited launch window for the PS5 and scarce components plus high manufacturing costs, meaning that Sony can't settle on a price and that it may actually be high. Then Ryder going rather interesting with their Valorant esports approach, plus, of course, as usual over here, a whole bunch of other stories. Okay, a few things. Daily briefing. It's the thing we do. It's on Patreon. Fantasy loot from our game team to your mailbox. Do you want the priest pin, the art pack? Check out the Patreon. It's a great way to also help us keep the lights on here, support what we're doing, get some cool stuff in return. So cheers to the patrons, and with that, let's go. So, after dropping his big article on Rockstar's changing culture, Jason Schreier has announced his departure from Kotaku, citing his ongoing dissatisfaction over the leadership at GO Media. This marks the fourth major departure from the site in only 5 months, with Jason following Cecilia D'Anastasio, Josh Riviera, and Gita Jackson. Now, he recaps in his post just some of his, favorite work at the site, most of it silly, but he highlights that Gawker properties could be both serious and dumb, using his last two articles as an example of that. One being funny, one being Rockstar. But as much as Jason is being very praising of what Gawker meant, I've got to be real, Jason, are you really serious about that completely? I mean, it's pretty much a place known as a bit of a trash fire. For Gawker themselves, their original co-founder, he had a problem with gay men not coming out. He saw it as a betrayal of his cause, and that led to him aggressively outing people on Gawker. Now, that included him outing Peter Thiel. Now, Peter Thiel then funded Hulk Hogan's Gawker lawsuit, leading to the collapse of Gawker. Now, of course, many of the sister sites continue to exist to this day, so, I get Jason saying they would publish just about anything, and that can be really good if you've got some hot, sensitive material, like some of the incredible work that, Jason has actually done in that site. But then, at the same time, they sure did have a lot of moral issues, and even in Cecilia's reporting, I actually can't say things because they breach sort of my ethical code there, but I know that in hounding sources over a number of her more high-profile articles, there's people I'm very aware of. There was things said in emails that were not supposed to be published. There was agreements that were made on emails that were then sort of voided once that actually came to articles being published. There was articles published that had identifiable information linking back to people. So, there's a lot of pros in what Jason said, but also I would really suggest that you take some grains of salt when it comes to, what the Gawker portfolio sort of operated itself like. So yeah, years ago when Gawker went, I don't think anyone sane really mourned its loss. But that said, right, with this new takeover, the GO Media stuff, I think in many ways that could be a swing in the opposite direction in a very bad way, as was experienced by the staff at Deadspin. This story, it's an interesting one, right? Jason's work, as far as many are concerned, it did provide a huge amount of the value that Kotaku had. Just about all of it, really. The disagreements with management, they started when Deadspin was told to stick to sports rather than to provide any political angles to their coverage. Now, that sparked off a lot of debate over whether Gawker outlets should basically stick to what was apparently, working for their audience and, their bottom line as well. Now, of course, saying stick to sports, though, from them, that leaves out the political angles of sports, which do exist. For an example, college football players in the US having a pretty wild financial situation, as far as I'm aware. So, it's inherently a bit of a political thing for them to say. Now, that said, being, anti-activist blogging in the name of being a more objective journalistic outlet, that is another thing. Really, we don't have enough time here to cover any of these topics properly. I think my TLDR would be digital media is a big old mess and there's issues in every single direction. Now, I will say one thing, whatever Jason does next, wherever he goes next, hopefully that same coverage continues. Work like what he did for the Rockstar video, because that stuff has been good. And I know a lot of people have got issues with Jason and he can sometimes be a bit spicy on Twitter or whatever, but when it actually comes to the sources he gets, the stories he publishes, they actually are pushing the industry in a good direction. So, Best of luck to him, and let's move on. Okay, next up, a new report was published this week that details Sony's launch strategy for the PS5, and it's a bit of a spicy one, right? So this report, citing numerous sources familiar with the plans, claims that Sony intend to produce far fewer PS5 launch units, as was compared to the PS4. Now, Sony have allegedly told their assembly partners that they will be making between 5 and 6 million units of the console by March 2021, and that's compared to 7.5 million during the PS4's launch window. Now, this is supposedly, right, because Sony are anticipating a decently high price for the console actually putting their customers off. And certainly, yes, a high price would do that. Analysts are saying that the PS5 could be anything between $450 to $550 US because of component shortages and increased manufacturing costs, but that basically a more limited launch could actually help to offset those costs. At any rate, right, the console is still on track for its holiday 2020 release. Sources are telling Bloomberg that mass production of the consoles will begin in June in preparation for simultaneous global launch holiday 2020. And while the console does remain on schedule, Sony recently did warn stockholders of a potential risk of delays to first and third-party PlayStation titles. Of course, the high-profile Last of Us 2 delay was announced pretty shortly after those remarks were made by Sony. Overall, though, you gotta wonder, like, are Microsoft in a better supply chain situation? Kind of hard to see that, really, because both consoles are using very similar components, but there'll be some jostling there. They're also just playing chicken with price, of course. And then also, I mean, $299 US for an Xbox Series X on a deal now is, like, pretty good. So $499 to me seems pretty reasonable for at least what the specs of these consoles seem to be. And another thing I would say is, yeah, the PS4 was $399 in launch, but then also something we need to take into account here is money's not, like, got the same value all the time. Inflation exists. So the launch price of $399, once you take into account inflation, throw in inflation, and $399 in today's terms is more like $475. So really, $499 is fairly similar, but that said, you could also say that, yeah, purchasing power is maybe not being lining up with inflation or something like that. But yeah, certainly $450, $499 seems like a reasonable thing. I think $450 would be ideal for actually getting sales, though. And then next up, something that's, I think, fairly obvious. Gamescom is going to be going to digital only this year. The existing online elements will be significantly expanded and new modules will be added. That is what they said. Gamescom 2020 was, of course, going to take place between August 25th to 29th, but Germany's ban on public gatherings now runs until August 31st, so they have just been cut off. Gamescom, though, has had success with digital events in the past. Last year's show had 370k attendees, but Jeff Keighley's opening night live broadcast, that was watched by 500k people, which was pretty decent. So we're just going to have to wait and see what this actually means, what an all-digital Gamescom will look like. But overall, I think this emphasis on digital for big consumer-facing announcements makes a lot of sense. I think that's something we'll see go into the future. And then just the other side of this, there'll be a secondary industry about convention support, which will lose out from those attendees, as will the Colon Messe. So that'll happen. And then on the game dev side, yeah, certainly indies, AA's who are going to be doing some in-person deal making, they will, of course, not have that opportunity, though they can just do it on Skype anyway. So, there you go, that's Gamescom. But next, let's move on. Cooking Mama. Bloody hell, there is still more Cooking Mama drama going on. Who would have thought that this fucking series would have been the most dramatic thing? Oh, wow. Okay, so earlier this week, the IP holders Office Create stated that Cookstar's release was unauthorized and that they were considering legal action against the game's publisher for breach of their contract. Well, Planet Entertainment, they have released a statement of their own. And the publisher claims, right, that Office Create had approved a detailed game design back in 2019, which both Planet and the devs, First Playable, followed precisely to launch. Now, this design is apparently what released on the Switch, including a few additional improved suggestions which add gameplay value. Now, while Planet did admit that creative differences popped up between them and Office Create as the game neared completion, their statement affirms that those differences were outside of the bounds of the agreement that they had. So yeah, right, there's one group saying one thing, another group saying one thing, but Planet Entertainment, they argue that they therefore are entirely within their rights to publish Cookstar and that no active litigation or ruling would prevent them from doing so. There's been no response from Office Create just yet, but we'll just have to wait and see how it pans out. A little bit insane though, that of all things, Cooking Mama has had this tier of drama. Next up though, well, this week Amazon France listed a couple of very interesting things. Basically, multiple console exclusive titles, PC ports, right? So these include Days Gone, Persona 5 Royale, Bloodborne, The Last of Us Part 2, all on PC. But any excitement was short-lived because Sony and Sega both just rubbished those claims. Both confirmed that the listings were errors and that they're investigating how those errors actually happened in the first place. So there you go. I mean, Sony admittedly, they've been a bit more liberal, right, in releasing their exclusive catalog on PC. But it does seem like Amazon got a bit carried away. That sort of thing has happened quite a few times before. I mean, yeah, like, sure, Amazon France did list a PC version of Horizon Zero Dawn before that port was officially announced, but they also... I mean, right, there's another time where, like, one of the games listed was Super Mario Odyssey. I really doubt Super Mario Odyssey is happening on PC. So I think this is pretty much a dead story. The next up, something funny. So the Crysis Remaster has been rumored for a while, but website metadata has pretty much leaked it. So Crysis Remaster, it's heading to PC, PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. It's got upgraded graphical features, enhanced textures, and it supports ray tracing on PC, which, I mean, man, that game looked really good. I'd be keen to see what that looks like. So yeah, there you go. Hopefully this returns Crysis to being, I suppose, a game that you can test your new rig out on. Pretty exciting though. I think Crysis was, at least for its first half, a pretty darn good game. Okay, then next up, Activision stuff. So speaking to CNBC, Bobby Kotick noted that right now it's too early to know whether working remote will delay any of their ongoing progress or projects, but that right now development is on track. Now, looking at the rest of the industry for comparison, delays are seeming more likely though, so it's hard to tell how true that will actually be. Now, we did outline the sorts of measures also that Activision Blizzard are taking to ensure that their remote working employees are actually safe and comfortable and, are capable and doing things well. Now, this includes the company paying for internet upgrades for their staff and also making equipment available to take home. All pretty regular stuff. But the weirdest measure, though, is that, Bobby actually just gave his personal phone number to the company's 10,000 staff, and that anybody can feel free to contact him if they feel concerned about, their health or anything like that. And apparently a few hundred people have already reached out to him. It's kind of interesting. I mean, Bobby, he's a figurehead, right? There's a lot of things in his sort of main persona of him on the internet and obviously, controversial decisions he's made. There's a lot of things that he will do in the day-to-day runnings of a company that won't exactly mesh with that, which does just go to show that, I mean, yes, people are actually not sort of two-dimensional cardboard cutouts. They generally do tend to be a little bit more well-rounded. So, interesting enough story. And then finally, something interesting on Valorant. And I really bring this up because it's in such a hilariously stark contrast to Blizzard. So Riot announced that there will be no official Valorant League, but instead they are going to be partnering with various third parties to create officially sanctioned tournaments and events for the game. Very much unlike the Blizzard style of locking everything down with the OWL as an example. Now, there still are going to be rules, right? The chat's going to be monitored to prevent, all the usual stuff they don't want in chat. There's a bit of a curious one where they're removing blood, right? And then also certain items like alcohol, gambling, and firearms are also off limits. And that stuff's all for advertisers. There's a little bit of me that does also wonder, if we think about, say, them being owned by Tencent, and then also the cultural values angle that usually results in those things not existing in Chinese versions of games, like remember the whole Rainbow Six Siege gambling things being removed. There's a bit of me that does think about that as well, but basically, this is pretty much like a good move, right? I mean, seems like individual smaller organizations, as long as they, stick by the rules, they'll be able to do stuff with Valorant, which does make a lot of sense. Now, you compare that, this sort of more hands-on approach, to Blizzard, where they essentially actively tried to kill grassroots Overwatch because they wanted all of Overwatch esports to be their thing. And of course, they've then, just strangled it and it's slowly dying. So there you go. I think Riot being quite sane here, quite tactical. I think they know that, the CSGO esports and just that community, it sort of operates quite well with a whole bunch of different partner organizations. So they probably know that if they want to move into that space, well, that's probably the way that they should actually do it. So there you go. That is it for today's gaming news. Quite a lot of interesting stuff. A whole bunch of different topics covered. I'm sure one or two of them might be a little bit spicy in the comments. Hopefully not too spicy though. But of course, do let me know what you thought about today's topics. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.